I bought the house on Red Maple Drive in early spring. It was the first real place I ever owned, and I was proud of it even though the siding needed paint and the backyard looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I moved in by myself. I was 33 at the time, single, working as an insurance adjuster out of a small office in town. I wasn't looking for anything fancy. I just wanted a place where I didn't have to hear the upstairs neighbors fighting or someone's dog running up and down a hallway at 3 in the morning. The house next door was the only one that caught my eye the first afternoon I arrived. Not because it looked interesting, but because every single one of its windows glowed with bright yellow light. It was around 3 in the afternoon when my moving truck pulled up, and the place already looked like someone had left the lights on all day. I didn't think much of it at first. People forget things like that. I've done it plenty of times. But when I took my last load inside at 9 that night, the lights were still on. Every room. No flicker, no movement behind the curtains. Nothing that suggested someone was home and awake. Only a house lit up like a showroom with no one around. I remember standing on my porch holding a box of kitchen stuff, trying to tell myself it was nothing. The neighborhood was quiet. You could hear one car pass every 10 minutes. A few porch lights were on, but not many. People seemed to turn in early around there. But that house next door stuck out like a store sign that couldn't be turned off. By midnight, I was unpacking in the kitchen. I made myself a cheap dinner and kept glancing out the window. The lights didn't change. It gave me an odd feeling. Not fear, just a small pressure in the back of my head, like something wasn't adding up. The next morning, I went out to get coffee and saw the house again, bright as ever. I didn't see cars in the driveway. No movement inside, nothing. I stood there sipping my coffee, wondering if maybe the owner worked night shifts or traveled a lot and didn't want to leave the place looking empty. It made sense, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that the pattern was strange. By the end of that first week, I realized something else. It wasn't just that the lights never went off. It was that the blinds and curtains never moved either. Not even a millimeter. Nothing changed about the house. The lawn wasn't cut. The garbage cans never moved. The mailbox door stayed shut even on days the mail carrier walked the route. And I never saw a single person come in or out. I decided to ask around casually. Most neighbors kept to themselves, but the guy across the street, a retired truck mechanic named George, seemed friendly enough. One morning, he saw me checking the mailbox and waved. I walked over and brought up the house. "That one," he said, glancing at it. "Yeah, no one's lived in there since the old owner passed. Been empty maybe 3 years." I remember staring at him, expecting him to crack a smile or say he was joking, but he looked dead serious. "That's impossible," I told him. "The lights are on every night." He shrugged. "Power's been shut off since last year." I didn't know how to respond to that. I watched George walk back inside while I tried to make sense of it. Maybe he was confused. Maybe the utility company forgot to shut off something. Maybe someone owned the house and visited occasionally, and he just didn't notice. I kept telling myself simple explanations, but the thought stayed in the back of my mind. If the house truly had no electricity, how were the lights on? A couple days later, I decided to take a better look. Not trespassing, just observing. I walked my trash cans down to the curb and slowed near the driveway of the neighboring house. The place didn't smell lived in. Most homes have a scent that hangs around. Cooking, cleaning supplies, whatever. This house didn't have anything. It was like a dead space. The windows were dusty, the siding faded, but every room glowed behind the curtains. The bulbs weren't flickering. They stayed at the exact same brightness all the time, like they didn't run through electricity the way normal bulbs did. That night, around 11, I sat in my living room trying to relax with a movie. The lights next door kept distracting me. They felt too bright, like they pushed through my blinds even though they shouldn't have. I paused the movie a few times and stared out. Nothing changed. No shadows moved. No cars pulled up. No door opened. I tried to let it go and focus on the movie. But around 1 in the morning, I heard something through the wall we shared. It was a faint tap, almost like someone pressing their knuckles against drywall. Then another tap, a little farther away, like it traveled from one side of the house to another. My house was old, and sounds traveled easily, but this noise seemed deliberate. I muted the TV and listened. Another tap, then a faint dragging sound, almost like someone sliding something heavy across the floor. I went quiet and waited. Nothing else happened. After a while, I convinced myself it was just settling wood or something weather-related, but the lights were still on. The next couple of weeks went almost the same way. I tried not to obsess, but the house made it difficult. If the lights had been off even once, I might have dropped the whole thing, but they didn't. Not once. Morning, noon, night. Every window had the same warm glow, like the place was waiting for me to look at it. One afternoon, I saw a pickup truck parked a few houses down with the city utilities logo on the side. I walked over and asked the worker if he knew anything about the house next to mine. He checked his tablet, looked at me, and said the place was listed as inactive with no open accounts. I asked him if he was sure. He told me that unless someone illegally hooked power to the house, it shouldn't have electricity at all. I walked back home feeling uneasy. I didn't like the idea that I might be living next to something that didn't match the rules the rest of us lived under. Houses don't power themselves. Light bulbs don't glow on their own. One night I woke to another sound. This time it was louder. It was 3 in the morning. I got out of bed and stood by my window, looking at the house. The room shone like always. I didn't see movement, but I heard something again through the wall. Slow, steady tapping. Not frantic or aggressive. More like someone trying to get attention in a patient way. I pressed my ear to the wall and listened. The tapping moved from one room to another. Then it stopped. A few seconds later, I heard something like fabric brushing against the inside of the wall. It reminded me of someone dragging their shirt along the drywall. I backed away and sat on the edge of my bed. I've worked in insurance long enough to know that sometimes houses make weird noises. Pipes knock, flooring shifts. But this felt personal, like someone was making sure I knew they were there. The next day, I decided to look up the previous owner, a man named Leonard Bryce. He died 3 years before I moved in. There wasn't much about him online except an obituary and a comment on a local forum saying he'd lived alone and rarely left his house. A neighbor wrote that the only time Leonard ever went outside was late at night, and always with his lights on. I closed the laptop and sat there thinking about what that meant. If the man never turned off his lights while alive, why were the lights still on years after his death? One night, after maybe a month of living there, I couldn't sleep. The light coming from next door felt brighter than usual. I stood at my window staring at it. I don't know what I expected to see. Maybe the power flicker. Maybe the curtains shift. Anything. Instead, I got something else. For the first time since I moved in, a shadow passed behind the curtain in the upstairs hallway window. It wasn't fast. It moved slowly, like someone walking from one room to another. When it reached the center of the window, it paused. The shape was clear, tall, thin, shoulders slightly hunched. Someone was inside that house. I froze and watched. After a few seconds, the shadow moved again and disappeared out of view. I kept staring at the window, waiting for it to return, but it didn't. The lights didn't change. Nothing else moved. I stood there for 10 minutes trying to understand how anyone could be inside a house with no electricity, no utilities, no signs of life. The next day, I called the non-emergency line and asked if someone could do a welfare check. They sent a patrol car in the afternoon. I watched from my porch as the officer knocked on the door. No answer. He tried again. Still no answer. He walked around the house. He tried a few windows. Then he came back to his car. He told me no one answered and the place was locked up. He didn't see anything inside. I told him about the lights, and he looked confused. He checked his report again and said according to his system, the house wasn't supposed to have active electricity. He left without going inside. I stood there watching the house again, feeling like something was wrong, really wrong. That night I heard tapping again. This time it was right behind my living room wall. 3 taps, then silence. 3 more taps, then silence again, like a signal. I walked to the wall and stared at it, not touching it. The tapping stopped after a few minutes, but I didn't relax. The next morning, I saw something I still think about today. The lights next door were still on, but one of the downstairs curtains had shifted, just a tiny bit, like someone pulled it aside slightly and let it fall back. It hadn't been like that before. I walked closer to get a better look for my yard. As I stepped into the grass, the curtains suddenly moved again, very slowly, just far enough that I saw a strip of darkness inside. I stared at it, and for a second, I swear someone was standing there looking out at me. Not clearly, not enough to make out a face, but there was a shape, still steady watching. I backed away and went inside my house. I closed all my blinds. I sat on the couch and waited for something else to happen. Nothing did, but I didn't sleep much that night. Over the next week, the tapping grew more frequent. Not louder, just more spaced throughout the night. Sometimes it came from the room next to my kitchen, sometimes from the shared wall near the stairs. I kept telling myself it was nothing and tried to live normally, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me. One night, sometime after 2, I woke up to a sound that wasn't tapping. It was a faint clicking, like someone turning a light switch on and off repeatedly. I sat up and listened. The clicking lasted maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. I knew it came from the house next door. I didn't know how I knew, but I felt it. The next morning, I looked at the house again. Still glowing bright, still silent, still wrong. Then things went further. I came home from work one evening and noticed the smallest thing out of place. The curtain in the upstairs hallway of the neighbor's house had moved again, but this time it was pulled back wider. And through the gap, I saw the faint outline of someone standing several feet inside the room. I couldn't see details. I couldn't see features, but it was the shape of a person, still as a statue. When I blinked and looked again, the curtain fell back into its usual place. That night, I heard tapping again, but this time it sounded like someone tapping from inside my own attic. I didn't go up to check. I sat awake until dawn instead. A couple days later, while backing out of my driveway, I noticed something that made me slam the brakes. The front door of the neighbor's house was open about 2 inches. It had never been opened before. I stared at the crack of darkness inside and waited. Nothing moved, but I felt something watching me. I didn't get out of my car. I drove to work with my chest tight and my stomach twisted. When I came home that afternoon, the door was closed again. Lights still on. No signs of break-in. That night, something happened that finally made me understand what was going on, even though I still can't explain it. I woke up at 3:11 a.m. because my bedroom was brighter than usual. I sat up and realized the brightness didn't come from my own house. It leaked through the blinds from next door. The lights were brighter than they had ever been. Almost white, almost like a floodlight, turned directly at my wall. I got up and pulled the blinds aside. Every single light in the neighbor's house shone brighter than normal, bright enough that it felt wrong, unnatural. And in one of the windows, directly across from mine, someone stood there. A man, tall, thin, shoulders slightly hunched, motionless. He didn't wave. He didn't nod. He didn't move. He just watched me. I froze. My hand was still holding the blinds. The man didn't shift or tilt his head or make any sign he knew I saw him. He stood there with the same silhouette I had seen weeks earlier. I dropped the blinds and stepped back. My heart was beating hard. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't call the police again over a shadow. They already thought I was overreacting. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in my living room waiting for dawn. When the sun finally came up, I checked the house again. The lights were still on, but the window where the man had stood looked normal. The curtains were still. No movement. Nothing unusual. I decided that day I needed to talk to someone who had known the previous owner. I found a phone number for a woman named Patricia, who had lived on the street for years. She told me she remembered Leonard well. He hated the dark, she said. Always kept every light on. All night long. Drove some of the neighbors crazy. I asked her if he had been strange or unwell. She hesitated before speaking. He was quiet, kept to himself, but he seemed scared sometimes, like he heard things the rest of us didn't. I asked if she ever went inside his house. No, she said, and no one else did either. I asked her why. She didn't answer at first. When she did, her voice was lower, because you could see shadows moving in the windows, even when Leonard wasn't home. I didn't know what to say. I sat there holding my phone, feeling cold. That night, I didn't sleep again. I stayed in my living room with the blinds closed, trying not to think about what she told me. Around 4, the tapping started again. Only this time it came from the wall behind my couch. Slow, steady taps. Then a pause. Then more taps. I sat completely still. The tapping continued for almost a full minute. Then it stopped. A few seconds later, I heard something else. A voice. Not loud. Not clear. Just a faint whisper-like sound behind the drywall. I couldn't understand the words. It lasted only a second or two, but I know I heard it. The next morning, I went outside to take a walk and clear my head. I walked past the neighbor's house and stopped dead. The front door was open again, wide this time, not a crack, a full 2 feet open, and inside, the lights shone as bright as ever. I couldn't see anything past the doorway, just a glow. I closed the door. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted to feel like I had some control over the situation. Maybe I wanted to pretend it was just a mistake. I shut the door, made sure it clicked, and walked away. That night, something happened that finally told me I needed to move. I came home from work around 6 and found muddy footprints on my porch. They were long, narrow, and spaced strangely, like someone had walked with an odd gait. They led from the steps to my front door, but there were no prints leading away. I looked at the neighbor's house. Lights still on, curtains still. I opened my door slowly and checked my house room by room. Everything looked the same. Nothing missing, nothing moved. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had crossed into my home and watched me. That night, around midnight, the tapping began again. But this time it didn't come from the wall. It came from directly behind me. I was sitting on the couch when I felt the smallest vibration against the cushion. I slowly turned around and saw nothing but the back of the couch. But the tapping came again, softer this time, almost like someone touching the fabric gently with the fingertip. I got up and backed away. The tapping stopped. I didn't sleep at all. I sat in my car until sunrise. The next morning, I walked over to George's house and asked him to look at the neighbor's place again. He tried the door. It was shut. He checked a few windows. He didn't see anything. He told me he believed me about the lights, but there was nothing more he could do. I stayed at the house another week because I needed time to find somewhere else to live. During that week, the tapping continued. Sometimes faint, sometimes closer. The lights next door never went off. The shadow appeared once more on the window, but didn't move. On my last night there, something happened that made me certain leaving was the right choice. I was packing boxes late and walked past a window facing the neighbor's house. The lights were just as bright as always, but for the first time, I saw the silhouette of the man in every window at the same time. Upstairs, downstairs, hallway, kitchen. Every window had the same tall, thin figure standing perfectly still. I stared at it until my eyes hurt. The figures didn't move, but I felt them watching me. I turned away, finished packing, and slept in my car for the rest of the night. I moved out the next day. That was 2 years ago. The house next door still has its lights on. I've driven by twice since then just to see if anything changed. Nothing has. The lights are always on. I moved into my new apartment in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of a mid-sized town in Ohio. The rent was reasonable, the area felt safe, and I liked that it was mostly families and older couples. I thought I was lucky to find a place like this, especially with my budget. My apartment was on the second floor of a small building, and the windows faced a street lined with trees. Across the street, there was a large, older house that had been empty for years. The paint was peeling, the lawn overgrown, and it looked abandoned, but the windows were all intact. I never paid it much attention at first, assuming it was just another old house slowly falling apart. It was a Saturday evening when I first noticed something unusual. I was sitting at my kitchen table, working on my laptop, when a flash of movement caught my eye. Across the street, in one of the upstairs windows of the old house, I could see a small face pressed against the glass. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or maybe a reflection, but the more I watched, the more certain I became that it was a child, maybe around 8 or 9 years old. The kid was staring directly at me. There was no blinking, no shifting, just watching. I froze for a moment, not sure what to do. My first thought was maybe a relative or a neighbor had moved in temporarily, but I didn't recognize the face, and the house didn't look like anyone had lived there for years. The next day, I asked one of the neighbors about it. She was an older woman who had lived there for decades. I described the house and the child I had seen. She frowned and shook her head. "Nobody's lived there for years," she said. "It's been empty since the last family moved out 5 years ago. Some people say it's haunted, but I don't believe in that." I laughed it off, but the unease didn't leave me. Over the next week, I saw the kid almost every night. He never moved, never blinked, just stared from the window across the street. Sometimes he was there in the morning, sometimes in the evening, but always in the same spot. I tried asking other neighbors, but no one had seen him, and no one knew of anyone moving into the house. I even checked the county records online to see if there had been any new residents. Nothing. The house was still officially empty. One night, I stayed up later than usual, thinking maybe I was imagining things. I sat at my table, scrolling through my phone, when I felt the same sense of being watched. I looked out the window, and there he was, closer this time. He wasn't on the second floor anymore. He was now on the first floor window to the right, his face almost touching the glass. I could see the detail in his expression, the way his eyes seemed too dark for his age. My stomach dropped. I wanted to leave, to run out and call the police, but something made me hesitate. It was like the way he looked at me held me there. I decided to call the local police, just to report a trespassing complaint. I explained what I had seen and mentioned that the house was supposed to be vacant. The dispatcher was polite but skeptical. "We'll send someone by in the morning," they said. I hung up feeling frustrated but somewhat relieved. The next day, I checked the house before the police arrived. The kid was gone, and the place looked as empty as ever. Windows intact, doors locked, No signs of anyone being inside. The police officer who came by did a quick walk around and confirmed that there was no one there. They suggested I keep an eye out. Maybe it was someone playing a prank. I nodded and thanked him, but deep down, I knew this wasn't a prank. For months, the kid would appear sporadically. Sometimes it was a week apart. Other times, he would show up for several nights in a row. I started documenting the sightings, taking notes on the time, which window he appeared in, and what he was wearing. It was always the same. Plain clothes, dark hair, pale face, blank expression. No one else ever reported seeing him, and I couldn't figure out a pattern. One evening, I came home late from work. It was dark, and I felt unusually tense as I approached my building. When I looked across the street, the kid was not at the window. Instead, I saw movement behind the house, near the overgrown backyard. A figure, smaller than an adult but taller than the child I had seen, moved quickly behind the fence. I squinted and thought I could see a shadow dart across the lawn, disappearing into the darkness. I froze. The next morning, I called the city code enforcement office to ask about the house. I explained the situation and asked if anyone had checked it recently. The man on the line sounded confused. "You're the first person to report any activity there in years," he said. "The place is still condemned. If you see anyone inside, call the police immediately. Do not try to approach it yourself." I tried to put it out of my mind, but I couldn't. The appearances started getting closer. I would see the kid peeking from behind the curtains when I walked to my car, sometimes even from the alley beside the building. I began to feel trapped in my own apartment, unable to ignore the sense that someone was constantly watching. Then, one morning, I woke up to find muddy footprints on the small patio outside my apartment. They were small, like a child's, and led to the edge of the railing, but there was no ladder or sign of how someone could have gotten there. My heart raced. I called the police again, and this time they took pictures and dusted for prints. The analysis came back as inconclusive. There were no signs of forced entry, and the prints didn't match anyone in the area. After that, I became more cautious. I kept blinds closed, installed cameras, and avoided looking directly at the abandoned house. But the kid kept showing up, moving from window to window, always watching. I eventually installed motion-sensitive lights, hoping to catch whoever was there, but the lights never triggered. It was as if he appeared only when I wasn't prepared. Months went by. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a homeless child, maybe someone playing an elaborate prank. Nothing added up. And then one day, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Through my camera feed, I caught a glimpse of a small hand sliding a note under my front door. I ran down, grabbed it, and unfolded the paper. It said, "I see you." I moved out a week later. I gave the apartment complex the keys and never looked back. I don't know who that kid was, or if he even existed in the way I thought, but every time I pass that street now, I can't help but glance at the old house, half expecting to see him standing there, staring. I always thought buying my first house would be one of the happiest moments of my life. I had finally saved enough, left my cramped apartment in the city, and moved into a quiet neighborhood in Indiana. Everything seemed normal at first. Quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and a sense of stability I hadn't felt in years. But it didn't take long for something about the house next door to start gnawing at me. A feeling I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. The house itself wasn't unusual. It was an older home, similar in style to the others on the block. But the yard was different, completely bare. No grass, no flowers, no shrubs, just dirt. In the middle of summer, while everyone else's lawns were green and carefully maintained, the soil looked dry and lifeless. I assumed it was just a landscaping issue. Maybe the owners were waiting to do something with it. But the longer I watched, the more unsettling it became. I introduced myself to my neighbors a few days after moving in. A woman in her late 40s answered the door. She smiled politely, gave a short greeting, and stepped back as if she wanted to disappear inside immediately. Her husband, tall and pale, appeared behind her. He nodded at me without speaking and then retreated into the house. It was odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Some people were just private. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing strange patterns. The husband spent hours in the yard every day. I thought he might be working on planting grass or preparing for landscaping, but he wasn't doing anything typical. He would kneel on the dirt, sometimes digging shallow holes, sometimes just staring at the ground. No tools, no fertilizer, nothing that suggested he was planting anything. Sometimes he carried what looked like a small bucket, moved around the yard, and poured its contents in random spots before covering them back up with dirt. The yard never changed. No plants grew. No grass appeared. It was always the same barren, lifeless dirt. One afternoon, while I was trimming my hedges near the property line, I accidentally dropped my shears. Before I could even step onto the neighbor's side, the husband appeared at the edge of the yard. His movements were quick, almost too quick. He picked up the shears, handed them back, and gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Something about it made my skin crawl. I nodded and took the tools back, telling myself I was overreacting. But over the following weeks, the unease grew. I began noticing things that didn't make sense. At night, I would sometimes see the shadows of small movements in their yard, even though no children lived there, and the lights inside the house were always dim or off. The husband's routine never changed. He was always out there digging, pouring, and staring. I considered calling someone about it, but what exactly would I say? My neighbor's yard has no grass, and he acts strange. It sounded ridiculous. Then, one morning, I walked past their yard on my way to work and saw something that made my stomach drop. A series of tiny footprints crisscrossed the bare dirt, as if children had been running through it. But I had never seen children there, and the yard was fenced on all sides. The footprints didn't lead anywhere. They just appeared in random spots, as if the ground itself had made them. I stepped back, stunned, and noticed that the husband was standing at a window, staring straight at me. He didn't move, didn't smile, just watched. I started avoiding their house. I kept my blinds closed, walked a different route when leaving for work, and tried not to look at the yard at all. But no matter what I did, the feeling of being watched never left. The yard stayed bare, but somehow, every few days, the ground looked freshly disturbed, as though someone had been there while I wasn't watching. I eventually spoke to a neighbor down the street, someone who had lived there for decades. I described the yard and the strange behavior. She frowned. "Nobody really talks about them," she said. "The husband keeps to himself. They've lived there for years, but they're odd. Some people have moved out because of it." Odd was an understatement. I knew there was something wrong, but I didn't know what. Then it happened. I came home one evening and noticed a small hole in my backyard, directly adjacent to theirs. The hole was shallow, barely noticeable, but something about it made my stomach twist. Over the next few weeks, I found more small holes, always shallow, always in odd places. I confronted the husband once, asking what he was doing, but he just smiled that same cold smile and walked away without a word. I sold the house 6 months later. I couldn't take it anymore. I still drive past that street occasionally, and the yard is always the same, barren, disturbed dirt with no sign of life. I don't know what they were doing there, what those holes were for, or why the yard never changed. But I do know one thing. I will never live next to anyone like that again.